to find a reed that's going to work for what we're doing. If you have a good reed, it's really easy to play well.
Before every engagement, we would sit in a room and he would choose his best reeds. And then I and he would sit and suck on these reeds until they were wet.
He spent more time on the reeds than he did the practicing.
I have tried to sound like Stan Getz. He had a sound that was tone and air and vibrato. You hear all that? Stan Getz was very good at playing things that had a lot of air on it.
My father was just a unique musician in that he was sort of born to play the saxophone.
I found the saxophone he played, I found the right mouthpiece that he played, I put the right reeds on. Couldn't do it. You can't sound like him because you just can't.
Is it a very subtle thing that you can't really describe?
Yeah, you can. Bebop was during the war years when life was frenetic, so was music. And then the aversion to that frenetic period came after bebop and was called the cool school. Everything was understated, underplayed.
Playing kind of thing was not Stan's thing, and it was also turning audiences away. So Stan arrived at that time.
The thing that's important about Stan Getz is just his melodies set a mood that makes you just have feelings.
I don't think I knew anybody else who could play a ballad, you know, and just make you want to cry. That's the highest compliment.
I found a record that I really love more than anything is called Getz for Lovers. And the first song is Moonlight in Vermont. And you put that on and the first thing is you hear him go bum bum ba da ba 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 da. Ba da 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 ba. And when he hits that note, it's an A flat, and he hits it with that air. It's like, oh, I've been waiting for this.
He had a little chip on his shoulder because he was a high school dropout to go with the big bands. He was a phenom. 15 years old, he was discovered. And he was off on the tour at 15 supporting his parents and so forth.
I think from Tea Garden, who I spent a year with when I was from 15 and a half to 16 and a half, I learned an awful lot. Just to listen to somebody like Tea Garden who can play a trombone like that, listen to how he put air into that horn, it was thrilling.
He would pick up his saxophone. I have distinct memories of him walking around the house with his robe on, and he would just hit notes. And I said, what are you doing? He goes, I just know that if I'm hitting the notes clean and the way I want, it's all gonna come together.
Wow. Unfortunately, I'm addicted and I still practice 3 hours every day.
Right. So let me tell you Stan's approach. He said, I don't ever want to practice. Stan was like, the less I work, the less I force this thing, the more relaxed concentration I produce, and that's where my best music comes out.
He was very much into visualization, and he thought that was the more perfect way to do it, and he could imagine it and play it that way more effectively than the actual hours.
Stan was trying to break into the scene. Dizzy and Miles Davis were like the core of it, and here was this little snotty kid who wanted to sit in. They couldn't get rid of him. They decided to play a really, really, really fast bebop tune. This annoying kid won't be able to keep up. He outplayed them all, and they almost fell on the floor. Dizzy turned to Stan. Man, that was hot. Miles, the grumpiest, most jealous and critical of everybody else on the jazz scene, gave it 5 stars.
Stan must have been in heaven. A picture with me and Miles Davis.
Oh, how cute.
But look how he's looking at me. To get him to give you a thumbs up was quite something.
It was also a fun time in jazz when it was really a swing time and people felt like dancing to it, and it was joyous.
So he would be around all of these jazz aficionados. People are offering you drinks. It's their time off from work. It's in the evening in clubs. People have a high vibration level. They definitely shouldn't be messing with drugs and alcohol, and particularly him.
I grew up too fast. I missed my teens, but I was listening and playing with great musicians. The drugs were in the culture. We were young Turks. We just romped and stomped.
Jack Teagarden was an alcoholic, and they would drink scotch right as they were driving with one hand and hold the bottle with the other, you know. When I first met Stan, the first thing I did, I threw out the bottle. The local radio station came to me with free tickets to this jazz concert. I brought a book just in case I was going to be bored. It was billed as the Birdland All-Stars. Stan was not a top billing at all. He came on the stage and he got a standing ovation without playing a note. And I noticed that Count Basie didn't get that, and nobody else got that. Turned out later that it was an encouragement applause because he was straight out of jail for armed robbery. When I met him in the green room, and I was reading this Thornton Wilder book in the back while I was waiting for my friends to finish to interview him, I was kind of cool to him, and he said, turn to the last page. And he quoted this beautiful, exquisite, deep thought from the very last paragraph, word by word. And I thought, this can't be a jazz musician. There's a land of the living, there's a land of the dead, and the meaning of life is that bridge with the love that you leave in the hearts of people that loved you. Turned out that he had not only perfect pitch, but perfect memory. I was just mystified. I'd never known anybody who ever was in jail, and I'd never heard about anybody who had a history of drug addiction. I was totally turned off. And then the wreckage, I didn't know he had a family. You know, he had a wife and children, a child that was born while he was in jail. So I wasn't at all interested in romance, but I thought that I have to see if I can get him some help. So I thought, well, I can be his friend. I happened to get a hold of my cousin, who was also a professor in neurology, and I said, can you help my friend from America? Stan was very unpleasant and gruff to him. He was so violent when they tried to take him off drugs. And then one morning, he woke up and it was like a different person. He was so quiet and shy and unassuming. I brought him a record player and Frank Sinatra records, I remember. And we played all those records and we walked in the fog, and it was so mind-blowing. Pure raw Stan was just the nicest person I could think of. And we just hit it off then. I thought naively, like most people did, once you put drug addiction behind you like an ear operation, it was behind you. But there's a residue that's left in the brain of an addict, so that once you have just one martini, it can trigger it again, and then they're right back worse than they were the last time they touched it.
They call it the Bossa Nova. Here are Stan Getz and Charlie Bird.
I heard a record that Charlie Bird brought up from Brazil. He was there on a State Department tour, and I immediately fell in love with it. And I took to it like a duck takes to water. I mean, it was so beautifully lyrical.
First of all, Stan never wanted to make any of these records.
Blame it on the bossa nova with its magic spell.
The State Department of Brazil brought a whole bunch of people to a Carnegie Hall concert. There must have been 50 musicians. I said, Stan, let's go. João and Jobim were part of them. I managed to get Stan there. They treated him like he was God Almighty, and that's when they told us that Stan had been their major influence on creating the bossa nova in the first place. So I was intrigued by that. I thought, this is a way to bring jazz back to the mainstream. The record company president thought I was crazy when I said this could be on the top of the hit parade. He said, it's a new times now, the Beatles, everything. Stan, go and do some rock and roll records. This was what you heard on the radio every single day. We had decided no compromises, no compromises, no compromises with drugs, and no compromises with quality of music. The record was a pure work of love. Joan was the kind of person who, the moon had to be in the right spot, and he had a different relationship when it was right to play the music. So Stan said, I don't know why you're making me do this, because Brazilians are known to be such a pain in the neck. And I looked at him and I said, aren't you known for being a pain in the neck? Well, as it turned out, they never had an argument. They couldn't talk, understand each other at all, but speechlessly they bonded.
With good musicians, you hardly need to say anything. You just start a tune and let it develop.
Joan, we invited him to dinner, and he stayed for many, many years.
Oh, wow.
Through 2 wives. Astrid first, I tried to get her a job, but she couldn't get up in the morning. Then my next suggestion was to put her on the record.
But each day when she walks to the sea,
She had no experience, and Stan thought she was singing out of tune, so I said, you blow a little harder, that's all you do.
young and lovely, the girl from Ipanema.
All these people that had terrible reputations for being so difficult,
Yeah.
somehow they connected and brought out the best in one another.
Quiet nights of quiet stars.
When we played the demos for the record company president, he said, that's not going to be released. I said, no, this is good stuff. How do I get it through this maze of the record company? Disc jockeys at that time had hired people called pickers. So I called a list of them and I said, I think you may like this. I guess they were intrigued. I got phone calls. Friends I had in San Francisco and St. Louis, all the different markets. I heard this great record on a pop radio station. Where can we get this record? And I said, you can't. MGM owned the whole record company. They arranged an appointment with the CEO, the big shot of MGM. They sent up a little record player, and I had this little single in my hand. He listened to it and he said, oh, I think I heard that on the way to work today. This is great. What's the problem? Well, Stan was told to go out and make some rock and roll. He said, consider it released.
I recorded the music because I thought it was beautiful, and here it turns out to be commercially very viable. I was amazed.
Anything that smacked of catering to anybody was not in their macho images. Oh, I don't want to sell out.
And also the jazz police are
Yeah,
very
they're-
powerful.
Stan did not have a thought of going to the Grammys. It was just the opposite of the person that he wanted to be seen as.
He was somebody that was very afraid of praise because he was so great and everybody kept telling him he was so great. But he knew that was not a good thing. He wanted to believe his best was still in front of him and he didn't want to rest on his laurels.
He says, this is all yours. You've been working on this. Just don't be disappointed. You're not going to win.
People downtown.
I just knew we were going to win.
Record of the year, right?
Right.
It was the big
Album of the-
album of the
We won a whole bunch of them, dressed in my best Audrey Hepburn outfit. This was the one record that brought jazz back into the forefront.
So when Stan became super famous,
Yeah.
like a pop star, how did that change your life?
Good and bad. We were able to build a studio with Mark Levinson. He didn't have to go to work so often. It had a tremendous downside because it did give Stan a fat head. I had this vision of Tea for Two and we will live happily ever after. But then there were negative things that came with it. Temptations to be a big shot. A little pot now was offered by his sidemen. And they didn't know Stan's history with jail and addiction and everything else. The brain of an addict gives you signals and excuses why you should try it just one more time. This thing was stronger than all of us. On some level, I started to realize that this was beyond a psychiatric depression or anything. I started to accept that this probably was some kind of unknown illness that Stan had, an actual brain disorder, because he was so totally opposite. He was dangerous. We had no real warning of which Stan was going to walk in that door. The first one to greet him was often in the middle of the night, the dog. He would make a beeline for me if he could smell that Stan was drinking, whether I was in bed or what, and push and push and push with his nose, like, time to get out of here, time to get out of here. And I used to keep my purse in the washing machine because that was the one place I knew that Stan would never go.
He was the most wonderful, sensitive guy. The emotional intelligence off the charts, intellectual intelligence off the charts. And he was really a great dad and a great husband, but he was allergic to drugs and alcohol. And when he ever touched alcohol or drugs, he changed immediately.
He had an adoring family, he had a successful life, he had everything, a studio to work in, but the addiction was stronger. He just wanted to, but couldn't overcome it.
It seemed like the first thing when he got drunk, he really wanted to destroy any awards. It sounds terrible. He was a wonderful guy, but this is just a different person to do that kind of things, but that's what happened. I have distinct memories of walking to the school bus in the morning. He had broken the trophies and stabbed them in the lawn. And we walked past them, my sister and I, just speechless, not knowing what to say to each other, just bewildered as to what that was about.
He was completely in his reptile brain and acting like a reptile. And anything good, because he felt so angry and threatened, fight or flight was his only options in his brain. One day, Stan came home from Birdland, and he says to me, I want you to hear these tapes that I have, because we touched the sun and the moon. It was so perfect last night. So he went down to the library and we listened to the tapes, and he said, oh, what garbage, I can't believe it. I perceived it as this was perfection, and this is nothing but garbage, I can't stand it. It must have been the alcohol. And it was like a moment of epiphany for him.
And since I stopped drinking, which is almost a year ago, I'm starting to feel like I'm a member of the world. I never was.
He became very interested in how the brain works, that there are alpha waves and beta waves, which is connected to the spirituality and peace thing, to Buddhism and yoga and all of these practices. I think that he was much, much higher from health than he ever was from a drug.
There's a state of mind that you need to do anything in the art forms. It's called the alpha state. It's sort of like thinking off the top of your head, relaxed concentration. And when you can't get that naturally, if you're too tired or something, you might resort to alcohol, drugs, anything that will give you a chance to get into alpha, think in the artistic sense of the word.
But those things take away your personality. For those that are really chemically dependent on anything, it's not you. I've made a lot of mistakes, and most of it was induced by my dependency on drugs and alcohol. Your different personality, completely. And of course I've done some dastardly things, but what can I do except to make amends and apologize?
My life has been music, and the constant search for it has been the mainspring of my life. And I think playing music's going to keep me alive. I love to play music.
Thank you.